This is a day we're telling Governor Patterson and the rest of Albany that the document that they handed us is not acceptable. The first speaker we have today is sitting on my shoulder. His sister was coming as well, but she got sick last night. So be quiet, because Ron, his sister wrote this speech, and he's going to say it for her. Say it loud. Loud.
I am speaking for all the kids around the world. We want to keep our water clean and to be healthy.
Yeah! So, I look around this crowd, and I'm one of the lucky few that have traveled around to all the hearings and met a lot of you. I recognize so many faces out here. It feels really good to have everybody here. The speakers we have are representative of different parts of the state, different walks of life, and different occupations. We have elected officials, we have concerned neighbors, we have people that started organizations because of this issue. The first speaker that I would like to have speak today is Chief Warren Lyons from Onondaga.
Yawahaskan, thank you for being well. Thank you for being here. Representing the Haudenosaunee, Onondaga Nation, Mohawks, Oneidas, Tuscaroras, Senecas, Cayugas. And we are old people, been here a long time. And water's always been good here. Water has always been good. We want to keep it that way. This young fella that just spoke, he's this next generation that we can see. But there's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 generations behind him. And that's who we're looking out for. The issues are simple. This is a lousy process. It's a lousy process, and it will destroy the water, destroy the land. There's no question about it. So you're right in being here. And you're also powerful in your unity. You must stay united. And you must make your representatives here support you. And they will. They're going to hear you because you're here. And we're here to help you with this because we're the original people here. And we know when this water was just the purest that it ever was. It is also 1/4 of the world's water right here. Right. Yes. And that's up to us to keep that clean. It's not just for us, it's for the whole world. So think about it in that way. And then we ourselves will do our prayers, we'll do our ceremonies, we'll put our minds together for you, which we are doing right now. We're right in the midst of our midwinter ceremonies. So our collective prayers and thoughts are going to go with all of us into the future. I want to thank you for this, and get after your legislatures and tell this governor that he's got to change his ways now. Yeah!
Now we have a representative from the state of New York, Mr. Brian Kavanaugh. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I know a lot of you have traveled a long way to be here. Some of you have also had a long trip from the park across the street. So, thank you for making it all the way to Albany and all the way to this room. We began, it's a cliche sometimes at these events to say that we sit on the shoulders of giants, right? Well, Wes is kind of a giant and in many senses, and that young man who spoke really, it's hard to beat the simple message that was delivered. What we're talking about today will affect our environment today, but it'll affect it for generations to come, and we need to make sure we get it right, and that's why we're here today. Now, believe it or not, there was actually a pro-fracking rally today. And we have a governor who has said we need this activity because we need the economic activity and we need the energy. Change his mind. Well, I know there are some parts of this state that are really in need of economic activity. I represent a community where some of us are struggling in this economy. So, we favor a little economic activity sometimes. And Lord knows, we favor clean energy. We all use energy. We all need some energy. But we know what we don't want. We do not want economic development, and we do not want energy at the expense of people's health and lives in this state. That we do not want to put in place a regime where gas and drilling companies are allowed to draw unlimited amounts of fresh water and poison it and put it into the earth without proper regulation. We know that we do not want economic development and energy at the expense of destroying rural communities that are not built to handle this kind of industrial activity. And most of all, we know that we don't want to turn over to an industry that has operated in secret throughout this country, that has used hundreds and hundreds of poisons without even simply letting people know what it is that they're doing. We're not going to accept that in New York State. Couple minutes. I just want to say quiet. This is an issue that generates so many good slogans, and that's a great one. And there are going to be, I'm sure there will be more iterations of the many uses of the word frack. Such a sonorous word. But I just want to say one word about that secrecy. We have a situation where hundreds of chemicals are being put into our water and injected into the earth, and in some cases going to stay there for generations. In other cases, we know they're going to seep into other places. In some cases, they're going to extract them back out and bring up all kinds of other toxins and maybe move them to other places across the state or across the country. The interest that the industry and this administration are talking about that they need to protect, the reason they say we need secrecy?
Money!
It's because they say that it's a trade secret. They say if one company wants to poison their water and put it into the earth, and another company wants to poison the water and put it into the earth, each company doesn't want the other company to know what poisons they're using. That's what they say. They say it's about trade secret, it's about efficient competition to drill effectively. We know that all that secrecy is about not telling us about the hundreds of poisons that are going to end up in our groundwater, that are going to end up on the land in unprotected storage facilities, and eventually are going to destroy human health in this environment. So we need to stop this. It's great to see you all here today. If the administration doesn't do the right thing, many of us are prepared to legislate to stop this. So thank you.
I just have to say one extra thing about the next speaker, because almost 2 years ago, in the beginning of this whole process, when some of us went and testified before the Environmental Conservation Committee in the Assembly, and I sat there, and the first time I testified in that stuffy room with no oxygen all day long, I sat there waiting for my turn to testify. And the panel, it was the Natural Resources Defense Council, Catskill Mountain Keeper, environmental advocates went up to the table at the end of the day. There was hardly anybody left in the room. Half the Environmental Conservation Committee was gone. A couple of people were sitting there kind of paying attention, but Barbara Lifton was sitting there taking
Good morning, everybody. It's great to see all of you here in Albany. It's very important that you're here at this rally and that you're going to meet with many, many legislators today. Some of you, I think, are going to be meeting with Pete Granis, am I right, the DEC commissioner? It's very important that you do all of these things here today in Albany. Meeting with other legislators up close and personal to tell them about our concerns about this industrial scale, industrial activity, very dangerous drilling activity throughout New York State. And of course in our beautiful, we're not just a beautiful region of the state, but we're a highly populated region of our state. We're not New York City, but there are lots of people out there and lots of houses. This is a state we live in. This is the state we love. And whose water resources are the most important, one of the most important, besides these wonderful children all over the state, one of the most important resources we have that we intend to preserve. We understand what's happening around the country and around the world with the degradation and the scarcity of water supplies. And so we feel a great fear, and I don't think it's an unfounded fear, when we see what's happened in Pennsylvania and in Colorado and in Texas and other states. I'm not one that's usually out there saying, let's be full of fear. There's way too much fear-mongering out there about lots of things that maybe we shouldn't be so fearful about, but this is a legitimate fear. We must begin living by the precautionary principle, and I know when it comes to our environment, the precautionary principle, thinking, as our Native American friend here just said, about the 7 generations that come behind us. Thinking by that principle rather than by corporate principles, if that's not an oxymoron, that are driven by the quarterly bottom line and by corporate propaganda that says, you got a crisis, we're here to help. How many have read Naomi Klein's The Shock Doctrine? Understand how the right wing is trying to creates a crisis, creates chaos, and then comes in to save us all. As if. Everyone should read The Shock Doctrine. And if you don't have time for that big volume, I got 10 pages called Disaster Capitalism from Harper's that everyone should read. Yes, there is a crisis. Global warming is real. We understand it's a crisis. And we want to act, we want government to act. Many individuals are already acting. We need government to step up to the plate, our federal government, our state government. We need a Marshall Plan for renewable energy. Wind, solar, geothermal, biomass, all of it. Yep. Not this frighteningly destructive process for extracting yet more fossil fuels from our ground. I want to see the carbon footprint study. For the entire drilling process. Before we say this is cleaner fuel. Oh, and by the way, I'm sure you know that it's the oil and gas companies, they want to step in and help now with green fuel. They're the ones that have been funding the global warming deniers. You're in a crisis when they decide we're in a crisis, so they can come in and take advantage.
That's bullfrag.
Bring in corporate solutions, rather than the solutions that we all decide on coming together in our government to say is good for us and good for our children and good for our water and good for the future. The big corporations are calling the shots way too much. And we're in a huge mess. We're in a huge mess in our country, in the world, as a result. And now they want to save us by drilling in the Marcellus Shale. We should be saying to them, as the GOP said to Richard Nixon when he stepped back up in 1976, to say to his party, let me help you out. This was 3 years after Watergate, the impeachment. Let me help you out, Richard Nixon said. And the GOP said, thank you very much, but you've helped already plenty. You've helped enough. Thank you very much. And we should say the same thing to the oil and gas companies. Thank you. Thank you, but you've done enough.
Thanks, but no thanks.
But that's not what's happening right now. The corporations have become more wealthy, more powerful. I heard someone talk about the Supreme Court decision, giving them full personhood with full rights. Very worrisome, but we can fight back on that too. They're more powerful than they have been in over 100 years, since the beginning of the 20th century, these corporations. 30 years after Ronald Reagan and Grover Norquist declared war on government, saying they wanted to shrink it till they could drown in the bathtub, they have succeeded all too well to drown government. Government is severely weakened at all levels. And our voice, that voice when we all come together in government to make decisions about our collective lives, has, I'm sad to say, been almost crippled. We need, it's so important that you're here to let your voices be heard. In your government, people are listening, believe me. There's a rumble going around. People are paying attention. Your voices will be heard today. But we've seen the power. It's an uphill battle. We've seen it in Washington with the health care debate, when 70% of the American people say we want a public option, and we end up without a public option. The health insurance companies have been winning that debate. They're very powerful, these corporations, and the gas and oil industry all the more so. And so it's an uphill battle. We need you to keep fighting. We need you to work here. We need you to go back home and continue to get more people aboard, mobilize more people. Every legislator in the state and the governor need to hear from you with very loud and many voices. And we want them, of course, to withdraw the SGIS.
Right.
Back to the drawing board. And if we're going to have drilling, we need real And also, while we're calling for withdrawal, I'm worried, but I'm hoping you're right. I'm hoping we can get it. Don't hope! But also, as you're out there, talk about getting co-sponsors for my strict liability bill, 9414, Assembly Bill 9414, that holds companies strictly liable for any damage or harm. And that way, mobilizing, continuing fighting, that way lies the potential for success. Because of you, I still have hope for democracy in New York State. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Lori Pollock-Smith from James Brennan's office.
Thank you very much for letting me speak very briefly. Mr. Brennan is chair of the Cities Committee, And in that capacity, he has to be at the budget hearing today. I'm trying. He has to be at the budget hearing in the LOB. And that is why he's asked me to come and just speak very briefly. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for supporting. He has two bills, A 1322 and A 8748. The first one would call for a 2-year moratorium to try to give some time for us to gather our thoughts and figure out how, if any drilling could be done safely. No, the second one sets forth some very detailed standards for protecting water. Any place.
The Brennan bill is separate and unequal protection. Statewide ban, not a New York City ban.
If you read the bill carefully, you will see that it bans drilling in the watershed. However, it also bans drilling in any place that's a sole source aquifer or in any way
The earth is an aquifer. Hey, read the new one before you speak. Let the lady have her.
Let's let the speaker speak, okay? Just out of courtesy for coming. Thank you. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I think I basically said what I wanted to say, and that is it protects the water any place in New York State from being contaminated, basically by drilling, but also the wording is such that any kind of contamination would be protected.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is the chair of the Tompkins County Legislature. And again, what's happening here, and as we're going through the speakers, is you're seeing that we're talking about representatives and people from all across the state are dissatisfied with this document. Martha Robertson from Tompkins County. Yay.
Security guards say as we're walking through, wow, I haven't seen this many people in a long time.
There'll be more.
So I just want to say, just because the DSGEIS is 800 pages doesn't mean it's adequate. DEC should take it back, trash it, and start over. But in our county, half the people, like me, get their water from a private well, just a hole right in the ground. That's where it comes from. So we have a lot to be worried about. And people are scared. Landowners, property owners are worried because property values are already starting to drop. Nobody wants to buy land when there's a lease on it or even nearby.
Right.
Leaseholders are horrified that they signed on to something they didn't know anything about. Now we figured out that Tompkins County could probably have about 5,000 wells. If there's just a 1% spill rate, just a spill on 1% of those wells, that's 5 million gallons of toxins dumped into our watershed. We figured out that they're talking about taking 25 billion gallons of fresh water out of the ground in just a couple of years. Now, don't tell me DEC couldn't figure out that that might cause permanent damage. 25 billion gallons just from our county. They aren't paying attention, so we need to make them pay attention. Local governments are overwhelmed by what's truck trips. At 1,800, and people always complain to me about the traffic. When this starts happening, we're going up to 40,000 truck trips a day. That's what we're talking about. That is what's happening to upstate New York if they do this. That we're not even, everybody's worried about the water. You should pay attention to the ozone, ground level ozone. The emissions from the diesel equipment, the leaks from the wells, all of that is going to hurt our air, and we have to worry about that too. Then there's the wastewater. They don't have any way to treat the wastewater. So these are the things that we're looking at. Now, we had a Cornell professor who was just in the paper this morning said, we're not talking about wells dotting the area. We're talking about wells covering the area.
That's right.
This is not your grandmother's drilling, and this is going to hurt all of upstate New York. This is the industrialization of rural New York.
That's right.
Even with the toughest possible safeguards, is this the smart thing to do? No. They're telling us we have to have natural gas because it's cleaner than coal. It's limited too. They say it's cleaner than coal, but that's only if you don't count the leaks in the system. That's only if you don't count all the emissions from the extraction process. It is not cleaner than coal. It is just as bad. It might be worse. So we have to tell you, Governor Patterson put out a goal. We're going to reduce our carbon emissions by 80% by 2050. I'm here to tell you.
Sullivan County.
I'm here to tell you, if they try this drilling, there's no way we can reduce our emissions. In fact, Tompkins County's figured out that over the next 30 years, all the emissions from all of our transportation, all of our buildings, all of our commerce, and all of our industry, the emissions from drillings is 17 times more carbon emissions than all of that other activity. This is not cleaner energy.
That's right.
Tompkins County's land, 40% of our land is leased up. But guess what? That's only 5% of the people. This is an election year. Governor Patterson, the land doesn't vote, the people do. So pull this DEIS, wait for the EPA to do their study, do a real study of the life cycle emissions, and then we'll come back to us. The gas isn't going anywhere. We'll be here. We want our water, we want our air, and we have to pay attention.
So now we have somebody who came all the way up from Delaware County, right in the middle of what they call a fairway. I think this person would say no way. Joan Tuberty from Delaware County, the town of Meredith, and Sea-Dog.
Yeah.
I'm a member of Sea-Dog, Shenango, Delaware at Seago Gas Drilling Opposition Group, and we're for a statewide ban. I was a farmer for over 20 years. I'm a teacher for about 16, and I care about people and I care about kids. Talking about gas drilling, it affects the economy. Because the estimated potential gain over the next 20 years from gas drilling pales in comparison to what will be lost with the gains from outdoor recreation, agriculture, and tourism.
Yes.
Calling for statewide ban. Because municipalities are deprived of their rights and their power to control local development, only in the case of oil and gas. And they'll be facing new costs for baseline testing for water, emergency response, health department monitoring of complaints, property tax assessment changes, building and repairing roads, wastewater treatment facilities, and demands on school systems. Because the severance tax on gas production will not be dedicated to the localities suffering from gas extraction and are usually proposed to remediate corporate harm. Because history tells us that exploitation of energy resources leads to widening gaps between rich and poor, corruption of public officials, and to the transformation of public wealth to private profit. Because the extraction industry's invasion of temporary workers occupying the affordable housing in short supply will push our working poor into the streets, as it has in Bradford and Susquehanna counties in Pennsylvania, increasing homelessness. We're calling for statewide ban. Gas drilling affects people's rights because thousands upon thousands of leases were signed by landowners who didn't understand what they were getting into, but the leases that will nonetheless be enforced by the state, which failed to alert them of the significance of their subsoil leasing. Landowners who knew nothing of injection wells or compressor stations and the possibility they'd be sited on their land. Because the legislature changed the spacing rules to allow for 640-acre units after people had already signed leases. Because municipalities that urge the withdrawal of the S-guys are forbidden by law to enforce their responsibility to protect their residents and citizens. Because the Frack Act before Congress would forbid underground injection of fracking fluids into aquifers serving public water systems but not private wells. Because the impact of gas drilling is so widespread, the doctrines of property rights should give way to the doctrine of participatory democracy. Gas drilling affects the integrity of the DEC because until August 2008, the DEC was claiming, in quotes, Marcellus shale fracking operations in New York State use fresh water, sand, nitrogen in a diluted soapy solution to fracture the shale, not benzene, toluene, or xylene. They fixed the evidence around the policy and showed itself to be an agent of the gas corporations. Because for 5 years the DEC has been clear-cutting forest land, upgrading and widening dirt roads within state land, constructing parking areas and requiring loggers to make roads that connect one logging job to another. Because the 10,000 signatures on anti-drilling petitions are dwarfed by the number of New Yorkers who aren't participating in this movement because they know that regulatory agencies are always captured by the industries they regulate. Because the reality in Dimmick, Pennsylvania, and Garfield County, Colorado, of Dunkard Creek and Dish, Texas, gives lie to the bureaucrats that their regulations guarantee the safety of the people. We call for a statewide ban. Because West Virginia's former mountaintops, Louisiana's Cancer Alley, the war in the Niger Delta, and the ruination of the Ecuadorian Amazon have more to tell us about this industry than all the neat cartoon drawings of the hyper-fracking process. Because clean water and clean air are more important than gas, we call for a statewide ban.
Heckler.
Because the leasing coalition members, who represent only 2.5% of the population and 12.5% of the land surface in the Marcellus Shale region, have an undue influence on local officials and serve as a conduit of gas corporation influence. Because compulsory integration process, which can include as much as 284 acres per Marcellus 640 unit, is the theft of private property. Because leases ostensibly 5 or 10 years long will be held open for generations by construction or rates of production determined by the drillers. Because the state has opened the People's State Forests, the People's State Parks, and the People's State University land to gas corporations. Because pending legislation calls for state revenues to be used to construct gas distribution lines in so-called underserved areas. And because the state has already spent millions providing pipelines for this highly profitable industry, even before the SGICE has been finalized. And finally, because regulatory processes create the possibility, if not the assurance, of the division of the state into exclusion zones and sacrifice zones, we call for a statewide ban.
Is from Otsego County and the Sustainable Otsego County. Adrian Kopinski.
You can say it again. Now is the time to ban shale gas fracking in New York State. Not after a whole nother study, but right now there's enough evidence that this has to be banned. It's far too dangerous, far too costly to be allowed anywhere in New York State. Anywhere. Horizontal hydrofracking for shale gas has been promoted on the basis of an industry safety record that does not exist. The DGEIS, with its glaring omissions and contradictions, should be withdrawn. Grossly inadequate. The DEC should reverse itself and exercise its option, which it has, of prohibiting fracking for shale gas in New York State. There are more reasons for this than we could possibly. You just heard a lot of them. You're going to hear some more. There's so many reasons for this. It's unbelievable. New York City has concluded that shale gas drilling is too dangerous to tolerate in its Catskill watershed reservoirs. Now, if the risk is too great for New York City, it is surely too great for the rest of us. All New Yorkers deserve equal water quality protection, equal protection under the law. All New Yorkers. The failure rate of shale gas hydrofracking runs from 2 to 8%, according to the research of Dr. Ron Bishop of SUNY Oneonta. Now, this is too great a risk to take with private wells, public reservoirs, aquifers, lakes and streams, and public health. Agriculture, you name it. Would you fly on an airline that had a 2% crash rate? That's what they're asking you to do. That's what they're asking us to do. Numerous press reports, we've heard all of this from Pennsylvania and elsewhere, many other places, documenting explosions, spills, stream contamination, road damage, well water pollution, and many other abuses offer further proof that shale gas fracking in the water-rich and congested northeastern United States cannot be safely done.
Right.
The toxic substances involved are mostly invisible, insidious, long-acting, and difficult, if not impossible, to clean up.
Yeah.
They'll be there virtually forever.
Impossible. They'll make us pay.
And they'll make us pay. Further, a so-called compulsory integration, by which landowners are forced to allow gas to be extracted from their property against their will, is an outrageous taking and unconstitutional abuse of property rights.
Right.
Citizens and communities have also been deprived of adequate legal recourse against drilling companies by their many exemptions from the law, including home rule in New York State. We should restore home rule in New York State. And the infamous exemption from the Drinking Water Act that was rammed through in 2005 must be roads, schools, water treatment plants, healthcare providers, fire and police departments, many others, will be severely stressed, as you've heard. What is the value of a house next to a drilling site with possible well contamination?
Zero.
Banks, zero, pretty close to zero. Banks are already refusing mortgages, as we've seen. I've had this experience myself within the last couple of months. Applying for a mortgage, was told by my credit union, no way. A boom and bust economic cycle where a few will benefit but many will suffer, will disrupt and distort local industries and communities. In the gas industry, profits are privatized, costs are socialized.
Right.
Individuals and communities are left holding the bag on cleanup and repair. There is no compensation for losses of existing industries such as agriculture, tourism, and recreation, and many others incompatible with industrial shale gas drilling. What is the value of a polluted trout stream meandering through a maze of gas drilling sites? The DEC is seriously understaffed and underfunded, as we all know. Further budget cuts are likely. It's a joke. The agency is in no position to regulate shale gas fracking in New York State. It's in no position to do so. The DGEIS, written by a consultant, they couldn't even write their own DGEIS, written by a consultant, is not a serious document, given the challenges of shale gas fracking, but an irresponsible whitewash. It is a scandal. It's a scandal that the DEC thinks it can regulate shale gas fracking in New York State. To salvage its honor, the DEC, should recommend that shale gas fracking in New York State be banned. Last but not least, natural gas, as we've heard and we all know, it's not clean. It's a polluting, non-renewable fossil fuel contributing to global warming. It should not be developed at this time, if ever. If ever. Wrong way. Well, if ever. There could be a fantasy world, I suppose, in cyberspace somewhere, like those diagrams that they show us, where somehow they could get this stuff out of the ground without doing any damage. I doubt it. There's nothing on the horizon, nothing in sight, nothing even conceivable at this point that could do that. So drilling, fracking now, again, should be banned. Ban fracking for shale gas.
Fracking is going to have irreparable contamination problems. I'm going to just tell you one thing. It doesn't make any difference that it's bad. It doesn't make any difference that it's going to cause harm. It doesn't make any difference that it's unfair. Unless we stop it, it's going to happen. If you want a statewide ban, you got to stop this draft from being adopted first. The Department of Environmental Conservation is pushing with all its might on a fatally flawed set of regulations that no one outside the gas industry thinks is adequate. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency has all but said, go back to the drawing board. It's not good enough. You can't base it on 1992 regulations. That doesn't make any difference. Our governor is still pushing. He has resisted all of our efforts to date. As you know, up until last November, this draft was sailing along towards adoption. It was a done deal. And then I documented 270 fires, explosions, massive uncontrolled releases, polluted water supply wells. I just blew away the myth that the existing regulations was it created an opportunity for all of you here to help permanently kill that draft until its fundamental problems are solved. So there are now more than 9,000 signatories to the coalition letter that I drafted. And it says, withdraw the draft, deal with the fundamental problems, but the most important thing is I've worked every day since mid-November, and I know so many of you have too. It isn't enough to put signs out. It isn't enough to blog. It isn't enough to go to meetings. You gotta get more signatories. You gotta get your towns to adopt resolutions. Village of Dryden just asked for the draft to be withdrawn. But more importantly, we got the city of New York to ask that the draft be withdrawn. Barbara Lipton, our friend from the very beginning, has persuaded many of her assembly colleagues to request that the draft be withdrawn. Almost every statewide, local, national environmental group in New York has asked for this draft to be withdrawn. But it's not enough. We need more signatories. We need you to go home after today and get more support at the grassroots level. But while we're here, we have to send a clear message to David Patterson. Yes. Don't do it. No one likes it. Withdraw it. You said if we could document shortcomings, you would address them. And that's what we want. Keep your word. Protect the environment. Once the Marcellus horizontal drilling occurs, we're never going to be able to stop it. This is our only chance. All hands on deck. Fight until we win.
Our last speaker, before we move into some short directions and thing, is Senior Fellow from the Regional Planning Association, Al Appleton.
well, anyway. When you talk to senior executives of the natural gas industry, they will tell you that all of these things are the result of isolated anecdotes. Now, I had no idea there were so many people in New York named Anecdote. One of the more interesting things about this presentation and the comments that have been made is virtually all of the issues have been placed on the table, except to me the most important one, which is we must win. Now, we must win not only for ourselves, we must win not only for his offspring, we must win for people across the country. We have got to. I cannot tell you how many people. Well, I'm trying to do both of those at the same time. I cannot tell you how many people have contacted us from across Colorado, Wyoming, Texas, Louisiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, all saying basically the same thing. Thank God someone is finally listening. Now, what we need to do is make sure you are listened to. Now, how do we do that? We've got a motion. We have not honed our facts hard enough yet. Everything important here was said. It will cost more money to drill than the state will make. It will hurt far more people than the state will help. It will not solve global warming. In fact, it will be a step backward for global warming. It will not help green energy. It will not help the green economy of the future. It will be a huge obstacle once we sink tens and hundreds of billions of dollars into this industry, and it has to be recovered. But it will not be enough to say no. All of those who are opposed to gas fracking have to say yes. Say yes to something else. Say yes to a 21st century future, not a 20th century past that is pitting the economy against the environment. The future, if we are going to have one, is a future in which the economy and the environment work together. That the more you do for the environment, the more you do for the economy. The more you do for the economy, the more you do for the environment. And the problem is, you're not the people who don't get that. It's the gas industry that doesn't get that. We've got an industry that is stuck in an institutional culture where the only thing that really matters is drill, baby, drill. We're in a culture that has never promoted a person for working with communities, that has never promoted a person for developing green fracking fluids, that doesn't even dare admit that is responding to the kinds of criticisms you're making by trying to come up with ways of recycling. It is locked into its fantasies that, in the words of the Chesapeake executive I dealt with, we can drill any place, even in the New York City watershed. Now, let me tell you something about the watershed. Beware of those who would divide and conquer this movement. I believe that the reason people made such an unbelievably irresponsible proposal about the watershed is they realized exactly what one of the previous speakers said. Forgive my terribleness with names. If you can harm drinking water anywhere, it will harm drinking water everywhere. They are attacking the New York City watershed because if they don't attack the New York City watershed, it automatically tumbles that they must protect all watersheds. So that do not be worried that we're going to save the New York City watershed, or New York City wants to save the New York City watershed. We understand, or I hope we understand, as well as they understand, what kind of precedent New York City's watershed creates. It is a precedent for the whole state. It is a bellwether for the whole state, and it is an example.
and the country.
And it is an example not only of saving water, it is an example of making the environment and the economy work together. I want everyone here to go home and ask their state representatives, why should we vote for somebody who's spending $1 billion a year more of our money on green energy and then is undercutting it by subsidizing fracking of natural gas? Did somebody tell me the state has a budget crisis? Did I miss something? The governor's budget asked for 35 new people. That's a real enforcement staff. I put together 400 to protect just the New York City watershed alone. And he did not even ask the natural gas industry to pay for it. And I would like to say to our representatives here, the first thing you have to do is amend that budget to make it a fee on the natural gas industry. That's what you pay for by your tax dollars.
Good for you.
Now, so how do we win? You have to go on, but you must remember that old political adage. Don't get mad, get even. You've gotten mad enough. Now it's time to go get even. Remember the Tea Party shirts that say, I'm mad and I vote? It's time to put the I vote part of that into practice. It's time to be out there and using the examples of the public officials you've heard from today as where we want to go in the future. And remember, the fact that we want a ban on natural gas, a ban on this kind of environmental pollution, doesn't mean that all the other people who want to help, people like the assemblyman who are going at particular pieces of this legislation, are wrong. If you look at something like the Brennan bill, it has everything in it that any one of these speakers has mentioned. Changes in compounding, local impact statements, landowner rights. There's more than one way to skin a cat, and we should be going at it with every way. We have no enemies who want. But remember, just as sustainability is ultimately a problem about economics, what we have to do, our ultimate weapon, is that the economics of this thing are really bad. You don't need me to say again what was said here. You need to take that home, and you need to say that. You need to stop the natural gas industry from trying to call you an anecdote. You need to stop them from trying to say this is an economy versus the environment fight. The more we do this dumb thing for the economy, the more we're going to hurt the environment. And the more we hurt the environment, the more the economy of upstate New York, of Long Island and Westchester and even New York City is going right down, down, down. The future is green energy. The future is the green economy. The future is companies that know that. That is what we want. Remember this final thing. The great social movements in the United States.
Talk louder.
I thought I was talking. The great social movements in the United States, the things that really change, very rarely start with the experts. They start with the common sense and common decency of anecdotes. Thank you all.
You need only look at today's weather to see how water can be contaminated by fracking. Dangerous chemicals could run off into our drinking water. I have opposed all fracking in New York State. It is way too dangerous. I have also introduced with Assemblymember Brennan legislation that would ban it near anyone's drinking water. And in the horrible circumstance, if DEC were to approve any fracking, to have tough penalties for the corporate greed owners that would do whatever they wanted to make money and not protect our drinking water. Of course, we need new sources of energy, but fracking is a dangerous way to get a new source of energy. And until and unless it's completely safe, which isn't going to be for a long time, we have to ban it in New York State. And one last thing. Don't let anyone try to make this an upstate, downstate divisive issue. Lives. If they live downstate New York City, if they live upstate, if they live in Syracuse, if they live anywhere, anywhere in New York State, we are sticking together and we are not going to let fracking ruin our drinking water.
And streams have value, and we have to let our legislators know that now is the time when public need has to supersede corporate greed. And right now, many will tell you, you can't fight the energy industry. They've been telling activists that for 20 years. They'll tell you, you can't fight their money, their power, their influence, their slick advertising. They're wrong. You know what's more powerful than a corporation's money, than a corporation's greed, than their advertising dollars, and all the power that they have? You are! And you know what your weapon is? Your weapon is your voice and your heart. We are New York's democracy. It's our land. It's our water. It's our future. It's our New York, and we're taking it back today. So when you walk into those meetings today, whether it's with the DEC or assembly members or state senate members, you remember you're important. You're the public. It's our government. It's our future. This is very important to us. Your time today, thank you so much. We want to thank the Catskill Mountain Keeper West. We want to thank the environmental advocates and Catherine Nadeau for all her hard work. We want to give a shout out to Roger Downs at Sierra Club and Jerry Land for Campaign Climate and Sarah Echo. Thank you. And we want to say, don't lobby today, please use your voice. Someone once said our voice is sometimes the only thing we have. We can use it for good, we can hurt people with it, or we can bring people up. Today we renew democracy in New York State with our collective voices working as one to protect all that we hold dear, all that we know that are necessities. These resources are not luxury items to